The water in the iron basin was cold enough to burn. Elara plunged her hands into it again, gasping softly as the freezing liquid bit into her cracked skin, scrubbing the mud from the hem of her sister's velvet gown. The scullery smelled of damp stone and old onions, a sharp contrast to the perfumes wafting from the upper floors of the Greyfall packhouse. Upstairs, the air was thick with rosewater and the cloying, desperate musk of she-wolves in heat. Down here, there was only the smell of the earth and Elara's own fear. "Is it done yet?" Freya stood in the doorway, a vision in crimson silk. She didn't wait for an answer. She kicked the basin, sloshing dirty water over Elara's worn boots. "Father is pacing," Freya sneered, her beauty marred by the cruelty that lived in her eyes. "The Alpha King is early. If I'm late to the lineup because you're too slow to clean a dress, I'll have you sleeping in the kennels again." Elara didn't look up. She wrung out the heavy fabric, her fingers trembling and red. "It's ready, Freya." Freya snatched the dress. "Good. Now get out of sight. Father said you're to stay in the cellar until the royal guard leaves. We can't have the Barren one offending the king's senses, can we?" The title stung worse than the freezing water. Barren. The word that had defined Elara's existence since her 18th birthday passed without a shift, without a scent, without a heat. In a world governed by biology and bloodlines, she was worse than human. She was a broken wolf, a defect. She was 22, unbonded, unwanted, and useful only for her hands. "I'll go," Elara whispered. "See that you do. King Kaelin didn't come down from the Obsidian Mountains to look at runts." Freya swept out, leaving a trail of excitement and anxiety in her wake. Elara wiped her hands on her rough apron. She should go to the cellar. It was safer there, darker, quiet. But as she turned toward the heavy oak door, a sensation struck her solar plexus like a physical blow. It wasn't pain. It was a pull. A magnetic hook snagged behind her navel, tugging her toward the front of the house with terrifying insistence. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The air in the scullery suddenly felt too thin, charged with static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. He is here. She didn't know how she knew. She just knew. Ignoring her father's orders, Elara crept out of the kitchen and into the shadows of the main hallway. She made herself small, pressing her back against the cold stone wall, inching toward the foyer. She had to see him. Just once. She had to see the monster the nursery rhymes warned about. The heavy double doors of the packhouse banged open, letting in a swirl of snow and the gray winter light. Alpha Torian, her father, bowed low, his bald head gleaming with sweat despite the chill. Beside him, Freya and her other sister, Barren, stood in their finery, chests heaving, cheeks pinched pink. They looked like offerings on an altar. And then, the sunlight was blocked out. King Kaelin filled the doorway. He was terrifyingly large, a wall of black leather and raw power. He didn't move like a man. He moved like a natural disaster contained in skin. He wore no crown. Only a heavy cloak of wolf fur that draped over shoulders broad enough to carry the sky. The air around him shimmered, dense with the weight of his dominance. Even from 20 feet away, hiding in the shadows, Elara felt the urge to drop to her knees and bare her throat. "Alpha Torian!" Kaelin's voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the floorboards and into Elara's soles. It sounded like stones grinding together deep underground. "You have prepared your tribute?" "Yes, my king," Torian stammered. "My daughters, the finest bloodlines in the region." Kaelin stepped into the hall. He didn't look at Torian. He walked past the trembling line of women, his movements fluid and silent. He was hunting. Elara held her breath, her hand clamped over her mouth. She watched him pass Freya. He paused for a fraction of a second, inhaled, and moved on. Freya looked devastated, her perfect pout trembling. He passed Maren. Nothing. He passed the Beta's daughters. Nothing. He reached the end of the line and stopped. The silence in the hall was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. "Is this all?" Kaelin asked. He didn't turn around. "Yes, my king," Torian said, his voice shaking. "Every eligible female." Kaelin turned slowly. His face was a landscape of hard plains and sharp angles, ruthless and beautiful in a way that made Elara's chest ache. But it was his expression that terrified her. He looked hungry. "You lie," Kaelin said softly. The temperature in the room plummeted. "My king? I smell—" Kaelin trailed off. His head tilted to the side, nostrils flaring. He closed his eyes for a beat, inhaling deeply. When he opened them, they weren't the standard brown of a wolf. They were gold, molten, glowing gold. And they snapped directly to the shadows where Elara stood. She froze. She was completely hidden by the darkness and the tapestry. She was sure of it. But his gaze pinned her there, stripping away the shadows, the wall, the very air between them. "There," Kaelin breathed. He ignored the line of preening women. He ignored her father. He walked straight toward her hiding spot. Every step he took sent a shockwave through Elara's body, her blood heating up, boiling in her veins. The pull in her gut turned into a scream of need. "Run!" her mind begged. "Stay!" her soul commanded. Kaelin reached the tapestry and ripped it aside with one hand. Elara gasped, stumbling back. She looked like a beggar, stained dress, messy hair, eyes wide with terror. She waited for the disgust. She waited for him to recoil from the scent of the Barren one. Instead, Kaelin loomed over her, consuming all the oxygen in the hallway. He smelled of pine forests, wood smoke, and rain on hot iron. It was the most intoxicating scent she had ever encountered. It made her dizzy. "What is this?" Kaelin asked, but he wasn't asking her father. He was looking down at her, his golden eyes tracing the line of her jaw, the pulse fluttering wildly in her throat. "Forgive me, king!" Torian rushed forward, panic in his voice. "She is a servant, a mistake. She is barren, my lord, a defect. I told her to hide in the cellar. Get out of here, Elara, before you offend the king." Torian reached out to grab Elara's arm, his fingers digging in cruelly to drag her away. A low, menacing growl tore through the room. It didn't come from Elara. It came from Kaelin. Before Torian could pull her, Kaelin's hand shot out, lightning fast, wrapping around Torian's wrist. The sound of bones grinding filled the silence. Torian shrieked, dropping to his knees. Kaelin didn't even look at the alpha he was crushing. His gaze remained locked on Elara's face. He released Torian with a shove that sent her father sprawling across the stone floor. "Touch her again," Kaelin whispered, his voice dangerously calm. "And I will remove the hand." The hall gasped. Freya let out a small squeak of horror. Elara couldn't breathe. She looked up at the monster, the killer, the king. He was so close now that she could feel the heat radiating from his armor. He raised a hand toward her face. She flinched, expecting a blow. He paused, his fingers hovering inches from her cheek. His eyes darkened, the gold swirling with something ancient and possessive. "Barren," He repeated the word as if it were a riddle he had just solved. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, his breath hot against her cold skin. You are not Barren, little wolf. You were just waiting. The silence that followed Kaelin's declaration was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a slaughter. Elara stood frozen, her cheek still tingling from the ghost of his breath, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Not Barren. The words bounced around her skull, nonsensical and terrifying. Alpha Torian scrambled to his feet, cradling his crushed wrist. His face was a mask of purple rage and confusion, but he kept his head lowered. To look an Alpha King in the eye after being struck was a death sentence. My king, Torian wheezed, pain clipping his words. She is unwashed, uneducated. She has no wolf. Surely you jest. Take Freya. Take Maren. They were bred for this. Kaelin straightened to his full height. He didn't look at Torian. He didn't look at the weeping Freya, who watched her dreams of royalty crumble before a sister she had treated like a dog. Kaelin only had eyes for Elara. I do not jest, Kaelin said. His voice was devoid of emotion, cold as the wind howling outside. And I do not repeat myself. He reached out. This time, he didn't stop. His hand, large and scarred, closed around Elara's upper arm. The moment his skin touched hers, the world tilted. It wasn't just heat, it was a scalding brand. A jolt of pure, raw energy arced from his fingers into her blood, zipping up her shoulder and exploding in her chest. Elara gasped, her knees buckling. It felt like waking up after a lifetime of sleep. It felt like drowning. Kaelin hissed, his grip tightening instinctively. His pupils dilated until the gold was nearly swallowed by black. For a second, he looked like he might bite her, or kiss her. The line between the two felt terrifyingly thin. Stand, he commanded, though his voice was rougher now, strained. Elara forced her legs to work. I need to pack, she stammered, her voice small and broken. My things. You have nothing in this house worth taking, Kaelin growled. He unclasped the heavy fur cloak from his shoulders. It was heavy, lined with velvet and smelling of him, that intoxicating mix of winter pine and storm. With a sweep of his arm, he draped it over her. The weight of it nearly bowed her, but the warmth was instant. It swallowed her small frame, hitting her ankles. It was a claim, a public marking. Let's go, he said. He didn't drag her. He guided her, his hand sliding down to rest possessively on the small of her back. The heat of his palm burned through the thick fur, branding her skin beneath. Elara walked in a daze, her feet moving automatically. They passed Freya. Her sister's eyes were wide with shock and venomous jealousy. She's a defect! Freya shrieked, losing her composure. She's empty! You're making a mistake! Kaelin stopped. He didn't turn his body, just his head. The look he gave Freya was so dismissive, so utterly bored, that it cut deeper than any growl. The mistake, Kaelin said softly, was thinking you were worthy of my attention because you know how to paint your face. He pushed Elara forward, out of the stifling gloom of the pack house and into the biting cold of the courtyard. The snow was falling harder now, but Elara didn't feel it. The cloak, his cloak, acted as a shield. The king's elite guard snapped to attention as they emerged, their armored fists thumping against their chest plates in unison. The sound was like a thunderclap. A massive black carriage waited, drawn by 4 night-black stallions that looked more like beasts of war than transport. The crest on the door was a silver wolf devouring a crown. A guard rushed to open the door. Kaelin lifted Elara effortlessly, his hands spanning her waist, and deposited her inside the velvet-lined interior. He climbed in after her, filling the small space with his overwhelming presence. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. The sudden intimacy was suffocating. Outside, the world was loud. Shouts, horses, wind. Inside, it was dead silent, save for the sound of their breathing. Elara pressed herself into the corner of the plush seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. Kalen sat opposite her. He was too big for the carriage. His knees brushed against hers with every sway of the vehicle as it lurched into motion. He didn't speak. He just watched her. His golden eyes traced every inch of her face, lingering on her mouth, her throat, her hands clutching his cloak. The intensity of his gaze felt physical, like a caress she couldn't escape. "Why?" Elara whispered finally. The word scraped her throat. Kalen blinked, breaking the trance. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his massive chest. The leather of his armor creaked. "Why what?" "Why me?" She looked down at her hands, stained and rough from years of labor. "My father, he wasn't lying. I have no wolf. I can't shift. I'm 22, and I've never felt anything." "You felt that," Kalen said. It wasn't a question. "When I touched you." Elara swallowed hard. She couldn't deny it. Her skin still hummed where he had gripped her. "Static," she lied weakly. "Just shock." Kalen let out a low, rumbling laugh that vibrated through the floorboards and into the soles of her feet. He leaned forward again, invading her space. The scent of him, rain, pine, power, flooded her senses, making her head swim. That was not static, Elara. He knew her name. She hadn't told him. "Then what do you want with me?" she demanded, a spark of fear giving her a sudden burst of courage. "If I'm not a tribute, am I a prisoner?" The carriage hit a rut, throwing her forward. Kalen's hand shot out, catching her knee to steady her. The contact burned again, hotter this time. He didn't let go. His thumb began to stroke the inside of her knee through the thin fabric of her dress. A slow, rhythmic motion that made her breath hitch. "You are not a prisoner," Kalen murmured, his eyes darkening, fixated on where his hand touched her leg. "And you are certainly not a tribute." "Then what am I?" The carriage began to pick up speed, leaving the lands of her childhood behind forever. Kalen looked up, trapping her gaze with his. The gold in his eyes swirled, molten and alive. "You are a puzzle," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that shivered down her spine. "A wolf who thinks she is human. A vessel full of power that has been corked tight." His hand slid up her leg, just an inch, but the implication was heavy enough to crush the air from her lungs. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. She could see the flecks of obsidian in his gold iris. She could feel the heat radiating off him, a furnace in the winter chill. "And I intend to be the one who breaks the seal." The carriage ride dissolved into a blur of shadowed forests and winding mountain roads. Inside the velvet-lined cabin, the silence was heavier than the snow piling up against the windows. Elara pressed herself into the corner, shivering. The temperature had dropped drastically as they climbed the obsidian mountains. Kalen moved instantly, He reached under his seat, pulling out a heavy fur blanket. Before she could protest, he leaned forward, unfolding it over her legs. His knuckles grazed her thigh, and that same electric heat, painful and addictive, jolted through her. Elara gasped, pulling back. "Don't!" "Do not flinch," Kalen said, his voice low. He didn't remove his hand. He let it rest on her knee, heavy and grounding. "You are freezing. If you succumb to the cold, you are of no use to me." "Use to you?" Elara challenged, her voice trembling. "You still haven't said why you took me." "I have no wolf. I am nothing." Kalen's lip curled, revealing the tip of a canine tooth. "You are not nothing, Elara. You are a vessel full of power that has been corked tight. Your father looks for a wolf and misses the storm." The carriage lurched, the wheels grinding against stone. They had arrived. Kalen kicked the door open. The wind outside was a physical blow, howling through a courtyard carved from black volcanic rock. Torches burned with blue flames, illuminating rows of guards in dark armor. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress of killers. "Come," Kalen commanded. He stepped out and offered a hand. Elara hesitated, eyeing the slick, icy cobblestones. "I won't drop you." She took his hand. His grip swallowed hers. As she stepped down, her worn boot slipped on the ice. Kalen didn't just steady her. He swept her up into his arms. Elara gasped, her hands instinctively clutching his shoulders. She was pressed flush against the hard leather of his armor, her face buried in the fur at his neck. The scent of him, pine, blood, and ozone, flooded her senses, making her head spin. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "The ice here is unforgiving," he grunted, striding toward the massive keep doors. "And I prefer you close." He carried her through the main gates, ignoring the bowing servants and the staring guards. He didn't stop at the guest wing. He carried her up a wide, spiraling staircase that seemed to climb into the heart of the mountain. They reached a set of double doors at the very top. 2 elite guards stepped aside instantly. Kalen carried her inside and kicked the door shut, sealing out the world. The room was enormous, dominated by a bed carved from dark wood and a balcony overlooking the storm. But it was the smell that hit Elara hardest. It smelled entirely of him. Concentrated, earthy, dangerous. This was his territory. His den. Kalen deposited her on the edge of the massive bed. The mattress dipped under her weight. Elara scrambled back against the headboard, pulling her knees to her chest. "This is your room," she accused, panic rising in her throat. Kalen unclasped his heavy cloak, letting it fall to the floor. He began to undo the leather bracers on his arms, his movements slow and deliberate. "It is." "I can't stay here. It's improper. "Propriety means nothing here," Kalen interrupted. He tossed the bracers onto a table and turned to face her. "And you cannot be anywhere else. The static I felt when I touched you, it is unstable. If you are too far from me, it will turn to pain." "You felt it in the carriage." Elara stared at him. Was that what the heat was? A symptom of proximity? "I am not your mate," she whispered, clinging to the one truth she knew. "I can't be." Kalen walked to the bed. He placed a hand on the mattress, leaning in until his face was level with hers. His golden eyes were swirling, hypnotic. "You keep saying that," he murmured, as if saying it makes it true. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His touch lingered on her temple, possessive and terrifyingly gentle. Rest, Elara. The servants will bring food. Tomorrow, we find out what you truly are. He turned to leave. Where are you going? She asked. The idea of being alone in his room was frightening, but being alone in this fortress without him felt worse. Kalen paused at the door, his hand on the iron latch. He didn't look back. His shoulders were tense, the muscles coiled tight beneath his black shirt. I have to feed, he said, his voice rough, bordering on a growl. The drive, your scent. It has awakened a hunger I haven't felt in a century. He opened the door, letting a draft of cold hallway air in. Lock it behind me, he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. And do not open it for anyone, not even if they sound like me. The shadows in this keep have voices, Elara. Do not let them in. With that, he stepped out, and the heavy door slammed shut, leaving Elara alone in the center of the Alpha's bed, surrounded by his scent and the terrifying promise of the morning. Elara slid the heavy iron bolt into place. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the royal chambers. She was alone. Finally. The room was a cavern of shadows and firelight, smelling intensely of Kalen, pine, storm, and masculine heat. It was overwhelming, seeping into her pores. A copper tub sat by the hearth, filled with steaming water. Elara stripped off her filthy dress, her hands shaking. The water was scalding, a shock to her perpetually cold skin, but she sank into it with a groan of pure relief. For the first time in her life, she wasn't scrubbing floors. She was just existing. She washed quickly, drying herself with a towel thicker than her winter cloak. But as she climbed into the massive bed, burying herself in furs that still held his body heat, she realized she couldn't wash away the pull. The static in her blood was humming, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to center on the door. On him. Exhaustion dragged her under. Darkness took her. But it wasn't empty. Suddenly, she was running. She was low to the ground, moving with a lethal fluid grace she had never possessed. The snow didn't bite. It felt cool against her. Pause? The forest was an explosion of scents. She smelled the sap in the pines, the fear of a hare miles away, and the metallic tang of upcoming violence. A stag appeared in the clearing, white breath puffing in the night air. She felt a surge of predatory joy that wasn't hers, yet belonged to her completely. She launched herself. The impact was a collision of muscle and bone. Her jaws snapped shut. Hot, sweet copper flooded her mouth. Elara gasped, jerking awake. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her mouth tasted of iron. You hunt well. The voice came from the shadows. Elara scrambled back against the headboard, clutching the furs to her chest. Kaylee sat in a high-backed leather chair near the balcony. He was shirtless, his skin a landscape of scars and corded muscle illuminated by the dying fire. He watched her with eyes that still held the golden glow of the wolf. I was sleeping, she stammered. You were with me, Kaelin corrected. He stood, moving toward the bed with the silent grace of the predator she had just inhabited. I felt you, a passenger in my mind. You felt the kill. He sat on the edge of the mattress. The bed dipped under his weight, tilting her gravity toward him. He reached out, his thumb brushing her lower lip. He pulled it away, showing her the smudge of red on his skin. You bit your own lip, he murmured, your body trying to mimic what your soul was doing. Elara touched her mouth, wincing at the sting. I don't understand. I have no wolf. I can't shift. And yet, you rode the mind of an alpha king. Kaelin's gaze was intense, dissecting her. You are a contradiction, Elara. A locked door I am dying to open. He picked up a goblet from the nightstand. Drink. Moonflower nectar. It calms the blood. She took the cup, her fingers grazing his. The spark between them was immediate, a sharp, static snap that made her breath hitch. She drank the cool, sweet liquid, watching him over the rim. He looked exhausted, the gold in his eyes fading to a deep, weary hazel. Why me? She asked again, lowering the cup. If I'm just a human with a strange connection. Because before you, Kaelin interrupted, his voice rough. I was cold. The gold bloodline is powerful, Elara, but it is hollow. We conquer, we rule, but we do not feel. Not until today. He leaned in. His hand cupped her cheek, his palm rough and impossibly hot. When I touched you, the ice cracked. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a tension that was terrifying and magnetic. Elara knew she should pull away. She was a servant, a nothing. He was a king, but his thumb stroked her cheekbone, and her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch. Kaelin lowered his head, his forehead resting against hers. Do not make me hope, he whispered. Hope is a dangerous thing for a monster. Bang! The heavy oak doors flew open. The lock Elara had engaged shattered, metal screeching against stone. Kaelin was moving before the wood hit the wall. He snarled, a vicious animal sound, and placed himself between Elara and the door. A woman stood in the threshold. She was draped in silver robes, her white blonde hair braided like a crown. She was beautiful, but cold, like a diamond that cuts. So, the woman said, stepping into the room. Her voice was like cracking ice. The rumors are true. You brought a stray into the royal chambers. Kaelin straightened, his shoulders bunching. Get out, Lyra. I am the high priestess of the silver moon, Lyra replied, her pale eyes locking onto Elara, who was peeking over Kaelin's shoulder. I go where the goddess bids me, and she is offended, Kaelin. Lyra walked closer, sneering. She smells of nothing, mud and fear. You rejected the alpha daughters for this? A barren human? She is my guest, Kaelin warned, his voice dropping to a subterranean growl. One more step, and your title won't save you. Guest? Lyra laughed, harsh and sharp. You claimed her. I see your scent all over her. Let us see if she survives a true wolf's judgment. Lyra raised a hand. The air suddenly smelled of ozone. No! Kaelin roared, but he was too far. Lyra flicked her wrist, and a lash of invisible silver energy whipped across the room. It struck Elara square in the chest. Pain exploded in her ribs, white-hot and searing. Elara screamed, thrown back against the headboard. The goblet flew from her hand, shattering on the floor. The room shook. Kalen moved faster than sight. 1 second he was standing, the next a shadow erupted from his back. He crossed the distance and slammed Elara against the stone wall, his hand wrapping around her throat, lifting her feet off the ground. "I will tear your head off," Kalen snarled, his voice distorted, half man, half beast. Elara clawed at his arm, gasping, her eyes wide with sudden terror. But then her gaze flickered past him, to the bed. "Look," she choked out. Kalen froze. He turned his head. Elara was clutching her chest, tears streaming down her face. But where the magic had struck her, the skin wasn't burned. It was glowing. A complex, silver, intricate mark was searing itself into her flesh just below her collarbone. It pulsed with a light that matched the moon outside. Elara went limp in Kalen's grip, staring in horror. "Impossible," the priestess whispered. "That is not a wolf mark. That is a royal seal." Kalen didn't just release the high priestess, he threw her. With a final, terrifying snarl, he flung Elara toward the shattered doorway. She stumbled, catching herself with a furious hiss, her hands flying to her bruised throat. "You have doomed yourself, Kalen," Elara choked out, pointing a trembling finger at Elara's chest. "The council will not allow a mongrel to carry the sovereign seal. They will come for her." "They will die on my steps," Kalen retorted, slamming the heavy door shut, sealing them inside. He dropped the facade of rage instantly, his face replaced by sharp, cold panic. He stalked back to the bed, dropping to his knees before her. "Let me see," he demanded, his voice rough. Elara was shaking, but the throb from the silver mark was mesmerizing. She lowered the blanket, exposing the symbol beneath her collarbone, a crescent moon and a wolf's jaw, glowing faintly beneath her skin. Kalen sucked in a sharp breath. He reached out, his finger tracing the mark. Elara gasped. The contact didn't burn. It sang. A pure, powerful shock of connection resonated through her bones, a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. "A royal seal," Kalen murmured, his eyes wide. "It means you are not just a mate. This is a claim made by the moon goddess. It makes you a queen, an equal." He snatched his hand back, standing abruptly. He paced toward the fireplace, running a hand violently through his dark hair. "This is disastrous," he muttered to the flames. "I thought I could hide you. But that mark is a beacon. Elara will tell them all. Every enemy I have will see you as my weakness." Elara climbed out of the bed, the borrowed shirt, his shirt, hanging loosely on her frame. "So I am in danger because of you." Kalen spun around, his expression tortured. "I am cursed, Elara. The gold bloodline is too potent. We burn out, or we freeze. I have been ice for a century. I brought you here because you brought quiet to the storm in my head." He gripped the carved bedpost so hard the wood groaned. "But I did not know you carried this power. If I bond with you, the power I can't contain will transfer. I don't know if I will stabilize you, or if my darkness will destroy you." The silence returned, thick with his confession. He was afraid of her. Elara took a step toward him. "You act as if I have no choice." I survived my family, Kaylin. I survived the cold. Don't lock me away. If I have this mark, if I have this power, show me how to fight it. She took another step, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. You don't understand the price. Then show me the price. She reached out and placed her palm flat against his bare chest, right over his heart. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The silver mark on her chest flared blindingly bright. Kaylin groaned, a sound of agony and ecstasy ripped from his throat. His entire body convulsed. He buckled, his knees hitting the stone floor with a heavy thud, dragging her down with him. Kaylin! Elara cried, grabbing his shoulders. He was burning up. His skin was scalding hot, his muscles seized and rigid. His eyes rolled back, the gold consuming the white entirely. Too much, he gasped, clutching his chest. The bond. It's demanding. It wants the merge. What merge? What do I do? Elara pulled at him, but his grip on her waist was iron. No, he wheezed. Don't leave. It hurts more when you pull away. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent desperately. He was shaking violently, his teeth visible as his jaw tightened. The curse, the raw power inside him, was overloading the connection. Elara, he groaned, his voice vibrating through her bones. I can't hold the shift. The wolf, he will take over. He squeezed his eyes shut, his back arching as bones began to shift and crack audibly. A monstrous snarl tore from his lips. Run, he choked out. His voice now a gravelly command. Get to the bath chamber. Lock the door. I can't protect you from him. Elara scrambled back, slipping on the fur rug. She looked at him one last time. He was on his hands and knees, claws scraping deep gouges into the stone floor. His silhouette elongating in the firelight. The look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a blind, terrifying animal hunger. She turned and sprinted for the heavy door of the adjoining bath chamber, slamming it shut and twisting the lock with shaking hands just as a massive, heavy weight slammed against the wood on the opposite side. The heavy impact of Kaylin's massive wolf form slamming against the bathroom door sent tremors through the stone. The wood groaned, but the iron bolt, forged to withstand mountain storms, held fast. Elara stumbled back, collapsing against the cool marble wall. On the other side, chaos reigned. She heard the guttural, choked sounds of the transformation, the bone-snapping distortion, the impossible sound of flesh tearing, and a roar that was not of rage, but of excruciating pain. It was the sound of the Alpha King being violently torn apart from the inside. The smell seeped through the cracks around the door. It was not the scent of pine and smoke she had known. It was something ancient and terrifying. Pure alpha musk, hot blood, and unmitigated power, unfiltered by the human mind. The curse of the gold wolf, now loose and destructive. Elara covered her mouth, silent tears streaming down her temples. She was the anchor, and she was breaking him. The bond, which she had hoped was salvation, was instead his fatal flaw. The raw roar abruptly cut off, replaced by a low, drawn-out whimper. The sound of the exhausted wolf collapsing onto the stone floor. Silence followed, broken only by the creature's ragged, wheezing breath. Elara crawled toward the door, fear warring with a desperate need to know if he was alive. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing, just the heavy, painful breathing. Then a new sound. It wasn't from the room. It came from outside the keep. A distant, grave sound. The iron alarm. The deep, mournful siren was reserved only for moments of direct attack. It was followed by the clash of steel on steel echoing up the stairwell. Distant screams, not of Kalen's guards, but the high, sharp cries of sorcerers. Magic. Elara had not wasted time. The royal seal on Elara's chest was a beacon, and the priestess had alerted her faction. Panic replaced fear. The keep was breached, and Kalen, the fortress's greatest defense, was reduced to a wounded, unstable creature just inches from her grasp. The sound of battle drew closer. Suddenly, the main bedroom door, which Kalen had sealed, was struck by an explosive force. The wood splintered violently inward. Cold, authoritative shouts filtered through the broken entryway. "The king is incapacitated. Find the human. She is the anchor of the seal. Find the anchor." Elara retreated to the copper tub, trying desperately to blend into the shadows. The bathroom door wouldn't hold. The first blow landed, not with Kalen's weight, but with a heavy axe. Wood groaned, and metal shrieked. The second blow was decisive, splitting the panel. "Here! She's in the bath chamber!" The door flew inward with a crash. 4 figures stood framed in the wreckage, clad in dark, light armor, clearly from a rival pack or a specialized hunting faction. At the front stood a tall man with a jagged scar running from his eye to his chin. The man ignored the massive black wolf panting weakly on the floor, a creature enormous and tar-dark, convulsing with Kalen trapped inside. His eyes dropped directly onto Elara. "There she is," he hissed in triumph. "The false Luna." The man took a step toward her. One of his guards hesitated. "The wolf, Lord!" "He is nothing," the man spat with contempt. "He failed to complete the shift. He is broken by the bond he refused. He won't move." The man, a hunter, grabbed Elara's arm, wrenching her out of the bath chamber and into the center of the devastated bedroom. Elara didn't resist. Her gaze was fixed on the floor. Kalen's wolf lay there. His fur was matted with blood and sweat, his powerful limbs trembling. His eyes, once molten gold, were hazy and flickering. The scent of his power was diminished, almost extinct. He was an alpha king reduced to a defeated, helpless animal. It was the most devastating image Elara had ever witnessed. He had claimed her, protected her, and now he was shattered because of her. And she had no power to save him. The hunter dragged her toward the shattered main doorway. "We have the anchor," the hunter roared into the chaos outside. "The Wolf King is broken!" As she was pulled across the threshold and into the dark, embattled hallway, Elara saw Kalen's wolf try to rise. He fought, scraping his massive claws against the stone, but only managed to lift his head. The wolf released a low, mournful whimper, not a roar, and his pained, distant golden eyes fixed on Elara. He was trying to protect her, even now. Tears blurred Elara's vision. She was his lowest point, and now she was being taken. "Don't worry, Luna," the hunter sneered, tightening his painful grip. "The Wolf King won't be attending your execution." He shoved her down the wide spiral staircase toward the darkness of the besieged fortress, and Elara knew that not only was the Alpha lost, but so was her own life. The descent was brutal. Lord Varys, the scar-faced hunter, dragged Elara down the spiral staircase and into the lower reaches of the obsidian keep, a labyrinth of dungeons and supply tunnels far beneath the battle raging above. The stone walls were slick with moisture. The air smelled of damp earth, rust, and old decay. He threw her into a cell carved entirely from cold, black rock. The door slammed shut with a finality that crushed all hope. Elara lay on the freezing ground, gasping. The pain in her chest was no longer the sharp agony from Lyra's strike, but a deep, rhythmic, searing ache that started at her collarbone and radiated outward. It was the royal seal screaming in protest. It felt like her soul was being stretched thin, trying to bridge the distance between her and Kaelin. Kaelin, she whispered, the name raw on her tongue. She knew instinctively that the pain wasn't just physical. It was the bond, severed and stressed. She was the anchor, and if the anchor was pulled too far from the ship would sink. Kaelin was dying, not just from the shift, but from her absence. The door opened with a metallic screech. Lord Varys and 2 guards entered, carrying a wickedly sharp silver dagger and a small, carved wooden box. "We don't have time for pleasantries, Luna," Varys sneered, his eyes glittering with cold calculation. He grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. "Tell me how a Barren bitch inherited a sovereign seal. Is it a gift? A curse? Or is it a weapon you stole from the gold alpha?" "I don't know," Elara choked out. "I'm not a wolf." "Liar." Varys pressed the cold silver point of the dagger against the glowing mark on her chest. The silver didn't burn her skin as it should have burned a werewolf. But the moment the metal touched the seal, Elara felt a massive, invisible pressure slam into her. It wasn't pain. It was the sudden, overwhelming sensation of power. Raw, pure lunar energy rushed into her body through the dagger, shocking her heart into a frantic rhythm. She wasn't barren. She was contained. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The shame, the loneliness, the weakness. It wasn't who she was. It was a prison built around her. Her wolf hadn't failed to emerge. It was never a wolf. It was something older, something magical. Varys cursed, dropping the dagger. The silver was smoking. "The magic rejects the conduit," he yelled at his guards. "The seal is too strong. We can't pierce it." Elara opened her eyes. They weren't brown anymore. They shimmered with a pale silver light, the color of the moon Varys had tried to command. "You can't touch me," Elara whispered, the words resonating with a strange, unnatural calm. Varys snarled, enraged by her defiance. "We will find a way. You will tell us how to break the gold alpha's spirit." He slammed the wooden box onto the stone floor. "Since we can't pierce your skin, we will pierce your mind. High Priestess Lyra left us a gift." The box contained a cluster of dried herbs and a thin, rusted chain, an artifact of dark magic designed to suppress memory and break will. As Varys reached for the chain, Elara saw the truth with crystalline clarity. Her entire life, the rejection, the barren label, the constant isolation, was a shell created to protect this power. And now, Kaelin's desperate claim, his chaotic touch, had broken the shell. She was not a victim of fate. She was a choice. The bond is not a solution. It is conflict. She can reject the bond even if biologically it exists. No, she wouldn't reject it. She would accept it. Kaelin hadn't meant to destroy her. He had meant to awaken her. And now she had to choose him, not out of passion, but out of necessity. He was her anchor, but she was his stabilizer. A cold, determined calm settled over her. As Varys reached for the magical chain, Elara acted. She wasn't strong physically, but the power thrumming through her was immense. She focused the raw lunar energy she had just absorbed from the silver dagger. She didn't shift. She didn't throw a fireball. She reached out with her mind. The air around Varys suddenly grew thick and viscous. He gasped, his movement slowing as if he were wading through syrup. His eyes widened in panic. "What is this?" he struggled. "Magic? You're a witch?" Elara didn't answer. She stood up, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. The silver glow faded from her eyes, but the determination remained. The bond was a choice, and she chose Kaelin. She walked past the struggling hunter. She picked up the discarded silver dagger. It was still smoking, but in her hand it felt cool and heavy. A tool, not a weapon. "He's dying," she stated simply, her voice devoid of emotion. "And I'm the only one who can stabilize him." Varys was thrashing, pinned by the invisible force she was generating. "You can't leave. You'll never get past the keep guard. The central keep is a war zone." Elara looked down at him. "Watch me." She drove the silver dagger hard into the stone wall, creating a loud, resonating clang. The sound focused her control. The invisible pressure around Varys intensified until he screamed, falling unconscious onto the damp floor. Elara pulled the dagger out of the wall. She looked up toward the ceiling, toward the massive spiral staircase that led to Kaelin's devastated chamber, where the unconscious Alpha King lay in his animal form. She was still weak, still vulnerable, still trapped in a fortress full of enemies, but she was no longer the barren, frightened servant. She was the Luna sovereign, and she was coming for her mate. Elara clutched the silver dagger, the moon magic stored within it still humming, and pushed through the dungeon cell door. The tunnel ahead was a maze of shadows and damp stone, but she didn't hesitate. She had a compass now, forged in pain and fueled by choice. The agonizing ache in her chest, the strained thread of the severed mate bond, was no longer a sign of weakness. It was a searing, focused beam of light pointing directly upward, toward Kaelin. The closer she moved to him, the more intense the pain, but the more potent the lunar energy swirling beneath her skin. She sprinted through the cold tunnels, her bare feet silent on the stone. She rounded a corner and slammed to a halt. 3 of Varys's heavily armored hunters were guarding a set of stairs. They saw her instantly. "The girl! She's escaped!" They drew their broadswords, the steel flashing in the torchlight. Elara didn't run. She stood her ground. "I am not a victim," she thought. "Show me how to fight it." She lifted her empty hand, channeling the raw, untamed energy she had absorbed. She focused on the air between them, the same way she had focused the pressure around Varys. A gust of wind, impossible in the underground passage, erupted from her palm. It wasn't just air. It felt like frozen glass. The hunters gasped, thrown backward, their helmets clattering against the stone. They weren't harmed, but they were shocked and stunned by the unnatural force. Elara didn't wait. She ran past their incapacitated forms and up the winding stone staircase. The ascent was a symbolic and physical torment. Every step brought her closer to the heart of the battle, and every step increased the pressure from the bond. The fortress above was a cacophony of war, the shriek of steel, the guttural cries of men, and the sporadic, terrifying sound of powerful magic exploding. As she reached the second landing, she saw the devastation. Kalen's elite guard, though lethal, were outnumbered and exhausted. The hallway was slick with blood, and the air smelled sharp with ozone and copper. She kept to the shadows, moving with a desperate urgency. Her focus was absolute, the pain in her chest. It was a lifeline. The bond was now pulsing so violently that her silver mark was heating up beneath her skin. She wasn't just locating him, she was synchronizing with him. "He is failing. He is slipping away," the bond screamed in her mind. She pushed past a body, a young soldier in the gold Alpha's colors, and burst onto the final great spiral staircase that led to the royal chambers. The top landing was where the true battle had been concentrated. Bodies lay everywhere, both Kalen's guards and the dark-armored mercenaries of Lyra's faction. But the fighting had stopped. Elara emerged from the shadows and saw why. The main chamber was a scene of wreckage. The massive oak door was shattered, furniture was overturned, and in the center of the room, near the fireplace, stood a circle of 5 figures. High Priestess Lyra was central to the group, cloaked in her shimmering silver robes, chanting a vicious, rhythmic spell. The 4 figures around her, fellow members of the Silver Moon Coven, were drawing power from the moonlit balcony through their hands, feeding the ritual. And in the middle of their circle, unconscious and utterly helpless, lay the Alpha Wolf. He was even bigger than she remembered, black as night, his breathing shallow and rattling. His golden eyes were closed, his massive head resting on the stone floor. He was vulnerable, defeated, and they were preparing to finish him. Lyra's chant intensified. The air above the wolf shimmered with dark purple energy, twisting and coiling like a serpent. "The power of the void demands the anchor," Lyra chanted, her voice ecstatic. "Release his spirit and claim his throne!" Lyra raised her hands to deliver the final blow. A spire of dark energy aimed directly at the wolf's temple. "No!" Elara screamed. She burst out of the stairwell shadows, silver dagger held high. The noise of her entrance shattered the concentration of the coven members. Lyra turned instantly, her pale eyes wide with shock. But her shock quickly turned to venomous triumph as she recognized the source of the interruption. "The mongrel returns!" Lyra shrieked. "You dare interrupt the transition of power?" Elara didn't answer. She ran toward the circle, the pain in her chest now so acute it felt like a dagger was truly piercing her. But the pain was power. "You cannot save him," Lyra sneered, refocusing on her. "You are just a vessel, a temporary anchor." Lyra waved her hand. 2 of the coven members broke their concentration and rushed toward Elara, their hands crackling with protective magic. Elara knew she couldn't fight them all, not yet. She was too slow. She stopped running and stood her ground, her gaze fixed on the broken alpha wolf. She dropped the silver dagger. She didn't lift her hand for a magical blast. She simply reached out with her soul, accepting the pain of the bond completely. "I am not just a vessel. I am a choice. I choose him." The silver mark on her chest exploded with light, a raw, blinding white flare of lunar magic. The light was so intense it forced Lyra and the remaining coven members to shield their eyes. Elara screamed, but the sound was quickly overwhelmed by a deeper, more resonant noise, the roar of the alpha wolf, who, despite his unconsciousness, was reacting to her power. Lyra staggered back, losing control of the ritual. The dark purple energy coiled above Kaelin fractured and dissipated. "You cannot stop the ritual!" Lyra shrieked, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "I am the vessel of the moon goddess!" Elara took one final, agonizing step, falling to her knees just outside the ring of power, her hands reaching out to the dark fur of the defeated Alpha. "No!" Elara choked out, her voice amplified by the raw magic swirling around her. "I am." The silver light pouring from Elara's chest was blinding, forcing the remaining coven members to shield their eyes. Lyra, however, recovered instantly, her face a mask of furious, unadulterated hatred. "You are nothing but a channel," Lyra shrieked, her voice echoing in the ravaged chamber. "You may be marked, but you are untaught. Your power will incinerate you!" Lyra raised both hands, pulling the remaining dark energy from the shattered moonlight, coiling it into a whip of shadow and malice. She launched the attack directly at Elara. Elara didn't flinch. She had no time to use her untamed power to defend herself. She looked at the incoming energy, dark, chaotic, and intended to kill, and then looked down at the massive, unconscious wolf beside her. "I can't win by defending myself. I win by stabilizing him." She reached out and placed both hands flat onto the massive, heat-drained flank of the alpha wolf. His fur was rough, matted with blood and sweat, but beneath her palms she felt the life force, a strong, stubborn current, flickering like a dying candle. "You need fuel!" Elara choked out, her voice a declaration of absolute surrender and ultimate choice. "Take it. I choose this. I choose you." She didn't wait for the attack to hit. She consciously forced the lunar energy that the royal seal had awakened, the raw, blinding white light, to flow out of her body, through her palms, and deep into the body of the collapsed Alpha. The effect was instantaneous and agonizing. The silver mark on her chest pulsed with impossible intensity, burning her skin as it became the conduit for a massive energy transfer. Elara screamed, not in fear, but from the brutal tearing of her soul as the bond completed. Her vision swam in white light, and she felt the raw, hollow power of the gold alpha bloodline rush back into her. Not to harm, but to be tempered. The sheer power of the bond completing forced Lyra's shadow whip to fragment before it reached them. The dark magic unable to sustain itself against the purity of the sovereign connection. "No! Stop!" Lyra shrieked, staggering backward. "You are bonding! You are stabilizing him!" Elara ignored her. Her head fell forward, resting on the Alpha's fur. She didn't have the strength to lift it. She was emptying herself, pouring every ounce of her life force and awakened magic into the dying Alpha. And then she felt it. The massive body beneath her hands seized, not in a convulsion of pain, but in a rush of pure, raw power returning. The flicker became a steady flame. A deep, powerful breath ripped through the alpha wolf's body. His eyes snapped open. They were molten gold, but now they were clear. They were focused. The wolf lifted his massive head, his nostrils flaring, the rage gone, replaced by an awareness that was terrifyingly calm. He looked down at Elara, kneeling beside him, radiating exhaustion and pure white light. He saw the royal seal blazing on her chest. He felt the completion of the bond, the perfect, stabilizing connection she had just forced into existence. The bond wasn't a curse anymore. It was a perfect circuit. Kaelin, for it was Kaelin, lucid and powerful, shifted. It wasn't the agonizing, bone-snapping transformation of before. It was fluid, blindingly fast. A flash of black fur and moonlight, and then he stood, towering over Elara, magnificent and lethal. He was naked, but Elara didn't notice. The air around him shimmered with energy, his body radiating health and power she hadn't known was possible. His gold eyes never left hers. He reached down, his large hand cupping her chin, forcing her gaze up to his. "You chose me," he murmured, his voice now deep and ringing with the authority of a king. Not a question, but a statement of absolute fact. Elara, weak but resolute, nodded. "I choose this." His lips curved into a predatory smile that was wholly masculine, utterly dominant, and possessively focused on her alone. But the battle was not finished. "Murderer!" Lyra screamed, launching a desperate, massive bolt of chaotic energy, the strongest she had left, aimed at Kaelin's bare chest. Kaelin didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Elara didn't either. The moment the magic left Lyra's hands, Elara's own strength, now stabilized by the bond, flowed outward. Kaelin didn't need to fight. The energy hit an invisible shield between them, a shimmering field of pure silver light that had erupted from both of their bodies. The dark magic shattered harmlessly against the shield, rebounding onto the high priestess. Lyra shrieked as her own power, amplified by the lunar shield, exploded around her. She didn't burn. She disintegrated, her silver robes turning to ash, her consciousness ripped from her body by the sheer force of the true sovereign power. The remaining coven members fell to their knees, their own fragile magic severed from the moon's command. Kaelin watched the light fade. He stepped over the pile of Lyra's ash. He looked down at Elara, still kneeling and exhausted, the silver mark pulsing faintly. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the mess of the room, the scent of blood, and the captured enemies. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his naked chest. The contact was solid, safe, and exhilarating. There was no pain, no burning, only the profound, deep hum of two halves made whole. "Mine," he whispered, a sound of absolute possession and triumph that vibrated in her soul. "You are finally mine." He lifted her, rising to his full height, holding her against the heat of his body. He looked at the wreckage of his chamber, at the surviving guards now kneeling in submission, and then back at the Luna who had saved his life. He lowered his head, and his lips brushed the mark on her chest, a kiss that was both a sacred oath and a final, permanent claim. "The seal is complete, Elara," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. "We begin now." The obsidian keep was still massive, still carved from black stone, but the light had changed. The great hall, once shadowed and echoing with cold power, now blazed with hearth fires. Tapestries depicting thriving forests replaced the old, violent battle scenes. The cold, metallic scent of blood and fear had been replaced by the steady, warm scent of pine and cinnamon. Luna Elara traced the rim of her goblet, now silver, not the chipped wood of her past, watching the pack gather below. They were celebrating the summer solstice, and the atmosphere was one of palpable relief and renewed strength. The usurpers had been purged. The council members who supported Lyra were overthrown, and the Gold Alpha's rule had never been more secure. Elara was no longer the servant girl in rags. She wore robes of deep green velvet, embroidered with silver thread that matched the permanent, gentle glow of the sovereign seal beneath her collarbone. The mark no longer burned. It pulsed with a steady, quiet warmth, the constant, comforting hum of a perfectly closed circuit. She felt a large, possessive hand settle on her shoulder, the touch sending a familiar surge of pure, warm safety through her body. "They look happy," Kalen murmured, his breath warm against her ear. He was dressed in simple black leather, his eyes, that perfect, clear gold, focused entirely on her. His power was still immense, but the hollow, terrifying coldness was gone. The Gold Alpha curse was broken, absorbed, and tempered by the steady flow of her lunar magic. Elara leaned into his touch, turning her head to meet his gaze. "They are secure. They know their king is whole." "No," Kalen corrected, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that only she truly heard. "They know their Luna chose him. Your choice gave them a future." The pack elders approached the throne dais, bowing deeply before her. These were the same wolves who 6 months ago had dismissed her as a barren failure. They saw her now not as a mongrel, but as the queen, the true vessel of the moon goddess. "Luna," the lead elder said, his voice reverent. "The harvests are bountiful. The women are strong. Life has returned to the mountains." Elara smiled, a genuine, easy smile she had not known she possessed. She raised her hand, not in command, but in blessing. "It is a new era, Elder, built on strength and truth." After the ceremonies were complete, Kalen dismissed the hall. He didn't order her to follow. He waited, his hand still resting on her back. His scent, a soft promise of protection. They walked in silence to the balcony, the stones still cool, but the air above the obsidian mountains clear and crisp. Below, the new watch patrolled, loyal, stabilized, strong. "I still think of the cellar sometimes," Elara admitted, wrapping her arms around her body, feeling the silk of her robe beneath her fingers. "The cold, the shame, the fear of being nothing." Kalen turned her to face him, his hands sliding to frame her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. There was no denial in his touch, only reverence and ownership. "You were never nothing, Elara. You were everything. They simply feared the power they couldn't name." He lowered his head, his lips brushing her forehead where the lines of worry used to settle. "The shame belonged to them. The power belongs to us." He looked into her eyes, the gold deep and loving. "Are you happy, Luna?" "I am home, Alpha." The word was enough. Kalen's lips finally settled on hers, a kiss that was slow, deep, and final. It wasn't the frantic, desperate claiming of their first kiss. It was the steady, unending promise of forever. When they pulled apart, Kalen's hands slid from her face, down her neck, past the now settled royal seal, and rested on her waist. His fingers stilled. He looked down, his eyes widening in sudden, absolute recognition. He lowered his head, pressing his ear lightly against her stomach, listening to the low, dual pulse within. Elara laid her hand on his dark hair, smiling as her heart swelled with a joy that transcended all curses, all fear, all past humiliations. "I told you," Elara whispered, her voice husky with love and quiet triumph. "I was not barren. I was just waiting for the king to break the seal." Kalen lifted his head, his eyes molten gold and shimmering with sudden, overwhelming emotion. He picked her up, holding her close to his heart. "You have given me everything," he breathed against her neck. "My queen, my life, our heir." He carried her inside, toward the massive bed covered in soft, dark furs. The moonlight followed them, casting a silver glow on the sovereign seal, which finally, completely, rested in eternal peace. The Alpha King had his Luna, and the Barren servant girl had found her world. And it was just